I went to every comic shop in Massachusetts where I found an endless supply of mind-blowing comic history, a few familiar faces, and a relentless gray curtain of precipitation. In this video, I'll take you on a tour of the first 30 shops that I visited, which include some of the best comic shops I've ever been to, and I'll give each shop a score out of 30 points. To save time, I've created a separate video where I explain the rubric, linked here and in the description, so I'll keep the scoring process very short in this video. Real quick, a huge shout out to everyone who donated to this trip or bought the commissions that funded it. If you want to support the Every Comic Shop in America tour, please check the description. Howdy, I'm Kurt Williams, and welcome to New England, which turned out to be quite the nerd haven. We are wasting no time, so the first shop I want to show you is His and Hers Comics in Greenfield. This wasn't our first stop of the trip, but it's one of the best shops in the state. They were super supportive of the trip, and I want to make sure they get lots of attention. The owner, Nishan, was very kind, and we also ran into Lunch Money Comics while we were there. More on that later. His and Hers has been in Greenfield since March of 2020, which is probably the worst timing ever, but the shop is clearly thriving, and I found myself constantly excited while I was there. The new issue section is huge. We can see this whole wall of new Marvel issues, another wall of DC and smaller indie publishers like Mad Cave, SHP, Invader, The Lab, Oni, Boom, etc., and a whole nother wall of just Image comics. In fact, it's every title that Image offers. Absolutely ridiculous new issue selection here. The new issues of the week also had their own wall, which was labeled and then sorted by publisher. I didn't see any staff picks or short series descriptions, and there wasn't a local creators section, which is probably because there aren't many local creators way out in Greenfield. The back issue section was decently large, with lots of minor keys above the boxes to grab your attention. These back issue bins were not too tight, nicely bagged and boarded, and as you can see by these issues of Captain America, pretty thorough and decently priced. There were a few issues here and there with price tags that made me raise an eyebrow, but almost every issue was priced fairly or a great deal. In fact, issue 223 of Uncanny X-Men was the issue that I used to compare prices at every shop in this state, and His and Hers had 7 copies of it, ranging from $3 to $8 each. That's maximum bananas. How did he know I was looking for that issue? I was also blown away by this copy of X-Men 222 that was only $5. The old issues of X-Men on the rack had me saying quite a few oh wows, and the wall behind the counter was completely plastered with keys. 2 copies of that gorgeous Command cover, which, if you like that, just wait until you see Command D. Check out this stunning copy of Daredevil 2, and we happened to be there on a consignment sale day, so we got to see some real grails being sold. These are just a taste of the priceless history that was on that counter. They had some boxes of magazines going for $5 each, where I was excited to finally grab my own copies of Marvel graphic novel issues 2 and 4, much cheaper than I thought I would find them. On the other side of the shop was a graphic novel section with decent selection, not the most thorough I've ever seen, but plenty of new additions. I also found this, The People's Comic Book, which is a super cool 1973 reprinting of communist cartoon strips, such as Red Women's Detachment and Bravery on the Deep Blue Sea. We were also lucky to be there on a day when there was a huge dollar bin sale, and even though just about all of it was from 2000 and newer, these bins were still full of value. If you saw the video Lunch Money Comics made about this sale, then you already know what great books were in there. In fact, here he is now.
We are filming each other. I am here with Kurt, and Kurt, what is your YouTube channel?
Kurt's Comic Review, and what's your YouTube channel?
Lunch Money Comics.
Yeah.
And Kurt's Comic Review was really interesting. You're not just reviewing random comic shops. You're checking out all the comic shops.
Right.
You're going state to state, going to every single comic book shop in every single state. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So you're in Massachusetts right now, and you're going to every single one in the state.
Yep, 55 of them.
55, that's it? No, 55 is really good. You also did Georgia.
Yes.
You did Michigan.
Yep.
Where else?
Just those 2. Michigan
Okay.
had, I think, 67. Georgia had 44.
Wow.
So it's been a lot of driving, but we've hit, I think so far we've hit more than 30 shops in Massachusetts, and a lot of them have been fantastic. Some of them have not. Some of them are terrible. Just kidding. They're all great.
Yep.
Had a great time.
I always talk about how great New England is. We have a great comic scene up here. A lot of it's the population density. There's just a lot jammed in there. But, hey, man, you're living the dream. You're traveling around the country, seeing lots of great stuff. And that's, like, the best part about doing the YouTube stuff in this community is that you get to meet people and travel around and see all these cool places. And there's a lot of collectors out there. So
I mean, I see all of your videos where you go to all the bazaars and
flea markets, yard
flea
sales,
markets. You find all kinds
shows.
of deals. I get
mix it up.
jealous of the deals you find.
Oh, they're around here, and you're if you hang around for another couple of weeks, if the weather finally gets better, you're right in flea market season now, man. So
oh man, flea market season in Georgia is just old Confederate artifacts.
Wow, that's kind of cool. But yeah, we actually get comic books up here, which is kind of nuts. So
yeah,
awesome. Well, definitely, guys, Lunch Money Comics viewers, check out Kurt's channel. Absolutely.
Yeah. Nice to meet you, dude. Super cool to meet other comic tubers while I'm on these trips. I'm not surprised that His and Hers is his local shop because it is a truly fantastic shop. They have subscriber discounts that also applies to back issues. They do big sales like this one, as well as a huge Christmas sale. They have creator signings whenever a local creator launches a book, and they had some of the most valuable keys I saw on the whole trip. Now, if you watch the video on scoring, you'll see that they fulfilled 3 of the 7 points for community involvement, 6 of the 7 points for back issues, 2 of the 4 points in new issues, 3 of the 4 points in bargain section, 2 of the 4 points in oh wow factor, and all 4 points in organization. That leaves His and Hers Comics with a total score of 20 out of 30 points. But Kurt, that doesn't make any sense compared to how you scored the shops in Georgia and Michigan. You're right, and I need to update the scores on all those shops because they're too high. Let His and Hers set the tone for shops from now on. This is a shop that I love, a shop that is in pursuit of excellence, and they earned all 20 of those points. There will be plenty of shops that don't earn 20 points, just you wait. Well, let's move on to the first stop of the tour, Paper Asylum in Beverly. This shop packed a lot of charm into a small space, and I wish I'd had more time to spend here. This shop is like if you took a Vault of Midnight and put it in a New England witch town. They were also playing retro video game music while we were there, and it was affecting me emotionally. The new issue section wasn't huge, mostly Marvel and DC, but it was labeled and had at least one series description. There were also quite a few boxes of recent issues marked cover price and sorted by title. The back issues were in pull-out drawers below the new issues, and even though they were a little out of order, the selection was pretty good. Their X-Men section went back pretty far, they had multiple copies of some books, and the prices were reasonable. They didn't have issue 223, but issue 224 was only $3, which is exactly what I want to see. Their copy of 222 was $20, which is much more common than $5. They also had lots of 12-cent Batman, which you don't see very often. Most of these were around $50 or $40 each. Though the back issues weren't as extensive as plenty of other shops, you could find some good stuff, like Chamber of Chills or some cartoon books copies of Bone. This was also the only shop I've ever seen back issues hanging from a pegboard, but I guess it's an efficient way to show off covers. They had a pretty good section of dollar bins with lots of great issues. You could find probably 10 or more issues in a row of Avengers from the early 80s in pretty good condition. Out of all the dollar bins in the state, these books were probably in the best shape. They had a wall of graphic novels, pretty decent selection with some indie books showcased. These were labeled by publisher as well as genre. There was also a rack of discount trades, all of which 50% off, which had some good finds such as this older printing of Clone Genesis. There was a line of keys around the ceiling, but I'm pretty sure most or all of those were reprints. Behind the counter were the real keys, like this issue of Amazing Fantasy, the second appearance of Thor, first appearance of Poison Ivy, first Iron Man, first Wolverine, a couple copies of the first Miles Morales, and much more. Their selection of cartoon strips was pretty impressive, not as thorough as Dr. No's, but a lot more than most shops. One of my favorite things in the shop was their blind date with manga section. So funny, so unique, such a great idea. We also can't forget the staff pick section, the art book section full of history, and the local creator section. I just got that Andrew McLean book at HeroesCon. This shop was full of additional nerdy stuff like these pins, these helmets, and all kinds of knickknacks. Check out the mouse droid. In the hall, they had a bulletin board covered in upcoming events and community information. They had artist signings once in a while, and check out their game night schedule. This shop was delightful. I really liked it. So they earned 3 points in community involvement, 5 points in back issues, 3 points in new issues, 4 points in bargain section, 2 points in no wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Paper Asylum with a total score of 21 out of 30 points. Really great shop, and if you'd like a further breakdown of that score, I would really prefer to have a website where you can see all the information, but I don't have that yet, so right now all I've got is this Google Doc. You can click this link or you can check the description. The next shop we visited was Silver Moon in Salem. This shop was located in the Witch City Mall, which is aptly named considering how witchy the whole area is. This shop feels like a Halloween shop mixed with a comic shop, and might look a little empty because the Salem Horror Festival was just a few days before we filmed here. The new issue section covered an entire wall with a good amount of indie books, not the widest selection of indie I've ever seen, but you can find most Image and Dynamite books at least. The new issues of the week weren't put out yet because this was a Tuesday, but you can see that they were ready to be labeled as new series and probably a couple other categories too. The back issues were in an island of tables in the middle of the shop, all bagged and boarded. The selection was pretty much just 2000 and newer, and the prices started at $4 each, which is a reasonable price, but more than I'd like to spend on these particular issues. There were some dollar bins next to the back issues, and there were some great deals in here, but you'd have to dig because they were unsorted. Bagged and boarded dollar $2 issues are pretty great though. They also had a box of discount comic sets and a few boxes of discount trades, which were mostly 50% off. I didn't find anything I was looking for in there, but you never know what's hiding. There was a small graphic novel section in the corner that didn't have a whole lot, but there were a good number of high quality editions. The rest of the shop was Halloween related stuff like these big clowns, action figures like this sick sea hag figure from Popeye, board games, display cases full of figurines, Funko Pops, whatever this case has, and a whole lot of knickknacks at the counter. I really liked these little ghost books, but I had to budget my money real tight. Overall, this shop was full of flavor, and the owners were delightful to chat with. They also have creator meet and greets and events every weekend in October. So they earned 3 points in community involvement, 1 point in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 2 points in bargain section, 2 points in a wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Silver Moon Comics with a total score of 14 out of 30 points. Remember, I'm going to change the scores for all the shops in Michigan and Georgia, so don't bother comparing these scores to those. Right down the street is Harrison's Comics, which is freaking massive. I could show you every second of my footage and it would still barely scratched the surface of the amount of awesome stuff crammed into this shop. The new issue section was probably the least impressive part, but the selection was great. It was all alphabetical, and I think new issues of the week were just mixed in with the rest of the recent issues. They had end cap shelves with a Pride section and an Indies for Girlies section, and probably more sections that I missed. The back issues took up a huge space at the back of the shop, and even though the selection was pretty thorough, well organized, and all bagged and boarded, it was a little expensive. It looked like minimum price on a Marvel book from the 80s was $8. These back issue bins also spread out into the shop in rows along the bottom of the shelves of action figures and whatnot. They had a huge selection of key issues on the front wall and in some boxes, most of which were graded. If you're looking for a key, there's a good chance that they have it. Check out this issue of Shadow Comics from 1943. I didn't get as much footage of the keys as I should have, but trust me when I say it was impressive. There was a huge section of magazines such as Doctor Who, Heavy Metal, Spacemen, and the original Alan Davis Captain Britain. The rack above these was full of artist editions and oversized books, and then there were a bunch of discount book boxes where I found the entire Bone volume for only $20. There was a single box of dollar books where I found a couple cartoon books from the 50s. These nice tables by the keys were exclusively Silver Age books, easily thousands of books here. The graphic novel section would count as extensive, I think, and the manga section was also huge. Downstairs, they had a pretty large space for gaming, full of supplies. The shop had stickers, plushies, candy, this sick Akira bike, this massive Hulk statue, and so much more. Truly an overwhelming amount of nerdy stuff. I'll just keep talking for a couple more seconds so I can show you more of the stuff. Anyway, they earned 3 points in community involvement, 6 points in back issues, 1 point in new issues, 3 points in bargain section, 2 points in oh wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Harrison's Comics with a total score of 19 out of 30 points. That's a really good score. The next shop was our first Newbury Comics location of the trip. It was inside a mall in Peabody, but we were not allowed to film. Before the trip, I tried contacting Newbury. I left them messages, I sent them emails, no answer. While we were at the Peabody location, I called every single extension number they have until I finally found a real person who then connected me to the correct person who then told me he would let me know soon if we could film. So it was too late to film at that shop because we were on a super tight schedule, but we did film at pretty much every other Newbury location. Don't worry, I filmed all the really noteworthy locations. This location, as well as a bunch of other ones, are just the little ones inside malls that are really not that special. And they all look exactly the same, so you're really not missing out on much. So we'll move on to Nick's comic strip in Danvers. This is one of the only shops in the state that I had previously been to, and it feels very similar to Battlegrounds in Dalton, Georgia. Here's the new issue section, which, again, this was on a Tuesday, so the new issues of the week are covered up. But the previous few months of new issues were on the lower shelves, and the selection here was pretty good. Of course, my camera is incapable of focusing. iPhone 16, what a piece of garbage. But you can see lots of image books, EC, Dark Horse, etc. The back issue section takes up the longest wall, and it has 3 layers of books. The top layer was Marvel, middle layer was DC, and the bottom layer was everything else. All of these were bagged and boarded with clear prices on the front, and the selection was relatively thorough. X-Men went back a ways and had prices that reflected their scarcity, though a lot of the later issues of X-Men were $5 each, which is a tad more than I'd like to spend. I also didn't see issue 223, but I assume it would have been $5. Check out this issue of Zippy the Chimp. I love this section at the back with the books on display, like real picture stories from the Bible and Real Clue crime stories. Nearby was an island of 50-cent bins or 3 for $1, which definitely had some good finds. There were also a few bins of half-off books, which was mostly Archie-adjacent series. This island of discount stuff was in the middle of a graphic novel room with shelves bursting with trades. There were probably hundreds of books in there that I've never heard of, sorted by publisher. They also had at least 100 Marvel Epic Collection books. The rest of the shop was overflowing with collectibles, mostly action figures and vintage toys. They had some Smurfs, which I always love to see, a display case full of Legos, including the Colonial boat that I've had since I was 6, this dope Batmobile, and this older, even doper Batmobile pedal car from 1966. Rows and rows of brand new action figures and plushies and whatnot. A section of Hot Wheels cars, including these vintage cars. This one is $200. There's another for $400 that I missed. They had just about every vintage Star Wars toy from the 70s. It was crazy. Behind the counter, they had a bunch of keys, including an issue of Jungle Comics from 1947, the first Punisher, first Wolverine, and much more. Also, outside they had a rack of half-off trades, some of which I was tempted to grab. Nick's comic strip co-host Boston Toy Con. They make a lot of donations to charity, they do One Piece pre-release nights, and they have seasonal sales and a rewards program for subscribers. There were a lot of great shops, packed with awesome stuff right at the beginning of the trip. So they earned 4 points in community involvement, 5 points in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 3 points in bargain section, 2 points in oh wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Nick's comic strip with a total score of 20 out of 30 points. Really great shop. I'll be drooling over that pedal car for years. The next shop was Mint Collectibles in North Reading. This shop has only been around since 2020, but it had some classic comic shop vibes. Very cozy, very soft-spoken, if it makes sense to describe a shop that way. The new issue section took up most of a wall with a DC bookshelf, an indie bookshelf, and a Marvel bookshelf. The indie shelf had a wide range of publishers like AWA, Aftershock, Antarctic Press, Behemoth, Image, IDW, etc. The new issues of the week were on separate bookshelves and were organized nicely. Next to the new issues was the graphic novel section, which had dozens of brand new omnibuses and deluxe editions, as well as a shelf of the classic evergreen stories. The back issue section wrapped around the outside of most of the shop and had hundreds of cool covers on the wall to grab your attention. I love this Aquaman cover, and look at how crisp the colors are on these Batman books. Here's the new Wonder Woman cover and this controversial cover from the same period. They had a ton of jungle action books, Bruce Gentry, early Journey into Mystery, gorgeous Steranko Nick Fury covers, a good chunk of the Miller Daredevil run, and so much more. Maybe I chose a bad box to look through, but the Captain America back issues were all over the place, and some of them were priced significantly higher than I would have expected. I was too distracted by all the cool stuff to find the X-Men comics, but look how many 12-cent issues of Action Comics they had in the back issue bins. The key issues at the counter were great, with the first Moon Knight, first Luke Cage, first Deathlock, Death of Gwen Stacy, first Venom, first Wolverine, first Phoenix, first Batgirl, first Black Panther, first Vision, and these really early issues of X-Men. There were some dollar bins on the ground near one of the doors, and even though they were a little removed from the rest of the shop, there was a lot of good stuff in there. I bought a few issues, and I left some more great stuff for y'all to find. The main floor of the shop had gaming supplies, rare coins, cards, and lots of action figures, including quite a few vintage Star Wars toys like Max Rebo. So they earned 2 points in community involvement, 5 points in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 2 points in bargain section, 1 point in oh wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Mint Collectibles with a score of 16 out of 30 points. It's a solid comic shop. The next comic shop was Comically Speaking in Reading, which has been around for 31 years and is another of the few shops in the state I had already been to. This shop is huge. Just the upstairs space feels huge, and just about all of it is back issues. The new issues take up one of the walls with selection from dozens of publishers. The new issues have a last week, 2 weeks ago, and 3 weeks ago section, and then they get put with the rest of the recent issues. The most recent issues were still covered up because this was on a Tuesday. The back issue section was absolutely nuts. Just look at how crisp these issues of Captain America are. Those colors are unreal. The prices are also a little unreal though. Sure, all these issues of Avengers are in great condition, but $10 each is a stretch, and especially anything after issue 300 is barely worth $1 to me. The sheer volume of back issues is insane insane though. I would have loved to spend all day in that shop just digging. Speaking of which, they had a ton of 50-cent bins, which may not have been sorted, but the issues were in great condition considering the price. I wish I could have gone through every single one of those bins. There was something like a couple hundred minor keys lining the back issue bins and the wall over the new issues, things like this sick issue of Tales of Suspense, the first issue of Ultimate Spider-Man, Claremont and Miller's Wolverine, an issue from the new Wonder Woman era, the first issue of Micronauts, and these cool comics that sure looked a lot like decorative plates. One wall of the shop was entirely graphic novels. There must have been thousands of books along that wall. I didn't spend a lot of time looking through them, but the selection of Marvel Masterworks alone was impressive. There was also a kids section, a bunch of oversized comics, the same giant Hulk as Harrison's comics had, but this time with a twist, and a couple of these giant bees nests that were surprisingly cool. Downstairs was a labyrinth of toys. Look at this place. It's heaven. Here's some HO scale cars. Here's a spinning rack of vintage Hot Wheels. Here's a hallway full of Ninja Turtles. Here's a ton of Star Wars Lego sets. Here's a bunch of other Lego sets. This shop was just bursting with stuff, but the thing I liked most about Comically Speaking was their little mascot Fuzzy. I couldn't help but take home one of these little guys because he's the perfect addition to my comic shelf here. I do wish he was actually fuzzy though. He's 3D printed, so he's actually kind of pokey. Anyway, this shop has local artists come in sometimes. They donate trades to the high school drama club, and they put a lot of emphasis on building community. They also have way more stuff than I can show you in this video. So they earned 6 points in community involvement, 5 points in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 4 points in bargain section, 3 points in wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Nick's comic strip with a total score of 24 out of 30 points. Wicked cool shop. The next shop was New England Comics in Quincy, and you may have heard of them because they created the Tick and this whole New England Comics press line, but currently a lot of the shops are being divvied up to new owners, so the communication from branch to branch is not very solid. That meant that we were not able to film inside. We're outside New England Comics in Quincy, Massachusetts. They would not allow me to film inside because it's too messy, and he said it was too short notice. I called every shop a month ago. I left an email at the email they gave me, and nobody ever got back to me. So, not my fault. But the shop is really good. It has great dollar bins. It has great bargain sections. It's got good art books. There's a whole room full of Silver Age books. The new issue selection is fantastic. They got the new issues labeled, and they have descriptions on them. The graphic novel section is pretty extensive. Overall, it's a fantastic comic shop, and I would have loved to show it to you, but I got a strong red light on this one, as well as the Brockton location. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to show you guys New England Comics at all. But good shop. And since I can't show it to you, I won't bother rating it. Next, we stopped at Newbury Comics in Braintree, which is essentially the same thing as Newbury Comics in Peabody. Most Newbury locations are just pop culture stores pretending to be comic shops with much more emphasis on records, t-shirts, knickknacks, and manga. They do have a small new comic section and a small graphic novel section, but that's really it. When we get to one of the better locations, I'll show you more, but for now, let's move on to New England Comics in Brockton, where I also couldn't film. All right, we're here at the last stop of the day. It's New England Comics in Brockton. At this one, we also could not film inside, which is a bummer because it's another great shop. They didn't have quite as many Silver Age comics as the one in Quincy had, but they did have a lot more dollar bins, and I got a bunch of good stuff out of the dollar bin. They had also way more back issues that were older. The back issues at the Quincy location were mostly from the 90s, 1000s, 10s. Back issues here, they went all the way back to the early 80s. And they were also priced pretty good. So I think in general I like this one better because it has more of the stuff I'm looking for, and it's got all the same cool stuff that the other shop had. Extensive graphic novels. They had some early sci-fi magazines from the 60s. Lots of oddities. There were some keys on the wall. And then the camera cut out, but you get the idea. That was the end of day one. Definitely some disappointments, but overall some really great shops. On day two, our first shop was Hall of Comics in Westborough. This was a great first shop of the day, a really solid shop in what felt like a lodge, almost like I was on a trip up north to a town that happened to have an excellent comic shop. New issues took up a wall right by the entrance, and the new issues of the week were labeled. They also had a bunch of additional labels, like friends and guests of the shop, recent title recommendations, important event books, books, nonfiction books, and recommendations with short descriptions. That's what I want to see from a new issue section. A lot of emphasis was on displaying graphic novels, so while there wasn't a massive wall of books to choose from, the graphic novel section was more inviting than most shops and had more labels. They also had employee picks on trades and all new printings of major stories. The back issues were well sorted and labeled, everything was bagged and boarded with clear prices. It was impeccable organization. They also had a few early issues of Avengers, priced higher than I would casually spend, but not unreasonable. This run of Avengers that I've collected is $5 to $8 per issue, which is more than I would spend, especially considering we just saw these same issues in the dollar bin at Paper Asylum. But if you're looking for a specific issue, it's not totally ridiculous pricing. If we look at the Uncanny X-Men section, we see that the selection is really good, with barely any issues missing. Also, all these issues are in really good shape, and a few of these are pretty great deals, like issue 201 for $12. 222 was $15 if you're keeping track. Above the back issues was a wall of keys and cool covers, and I know this footage is a bit hard to see, but we've got All-Star Western, first appearance of Rogue, first Omega Red, first Beta Ray Bill, first Luke Cage, first Moon Knight, plenty of early Roy Thomas Avengers, first Winter Soldier, early Strange Tales and Journey into Mystery, first Harley Quinn, first Drax, first Galactus, first Black Panther, first Miles Morales, and lots of other awesome titles like Chamber of Darkness and Race for the Moon. The wall book section was truly impressive. They also had some boxes of comic sets, neatly organized and priced, and a huge section of dollar books. I didn't find anything I was looking for in here, but there were definitely some quality issues. There were racks of more Silver Age books, all in fantastic condition, and there was a row of signed art pieces around the ceiling of the shop done by artists who had been in for signings. There were some pretty big names up there. I was impressed. They also had a young adult section right by the door, a bulletin board with information about subscriptions and local events, and all kinds of high-quality decorations throughout the shop. Hall of Comics had some of the best signage I've ever seen in a comic shop. You could tell that they cared about their customers being informed and engaged. So they earned 4 points in community involvement, 6 points in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 2 points in bargain section, 3 points in oh wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Hall of Comics with a total score of 21 out of 30 points. Really impressive shop. You gotta go. Then we went to another impressive shop, That's Entertainment in Worcester. This shop is huge. It's more like a warehouse, and it's been around since 1980. They've got murals all over the outside of the building and these giant paintings in the window. Then as soon as you go inside, there's a giant calendar with all the game nights and events coming up, and a rack of discounted books. Inside is a treasure trove of nerdy stuff, and I won't be able to show you everything, but we'll focus on the highlights. The new issues took up a ton of space, with mostly Marvel and DC in this corner of the shop. Did you catch the labels? They even have a sign limiting people to 2 copies of the same issue, which is awesome. And they have all the indie stuff over here. The selection was incredible. They had a ton of stuff I've never heard of, more little informational signs, great organization. The back issue section was also crazy. I did a little math to get a ballpark estimate of around 50,000 issues available to dig through at least. Hall of Comics was focused on quality, and That's Entertainment has the quantity. Not everything was boarded, the bins had some extra space, the bins themselves were doing a big wiggle, and issues weren't in great shape a lot of the time, but you were almost guaranteed to find the issue you were looking for, and the prices weren't bad. A lot of issues in this X Factor series were $3 or $4, which is right on the money. They also had a ton of Silver Age DC books, like all these issues of Superboy. I never found the X-Men books, but I'm guessing issue 223 would have been around $4. They also had a deal where you get 20% off your back issue purchase if you spend $20 or more. I was really interested in this copy of Doomboy, which was in their section of new indie graphic novels. They had more graphic novel categories like a horror shelf, a Star Wars shelf, and a Marvel Epic Collection shelf. And of course, the regular graphic novel wall was insane, just a tremendous selection of books. Near the graphic novel wall was a bunch of boxes of miscellaneous magazines, which is exactly what I like to dig through. There was a lot of random oversized stuff, as well as some pulp magazines from the 40s and the 50s, monster magazines, Marvel Treasury editions, and a bunch of other cool books. They had 2 bins of dollar books, maybe not the best selection ever, but next to those they had a ton of used and discounted trade paperbacks. There was some good stuff in there, like Hellboy, and most of it was half off cover price. They had a couple cartoon books like Doonesbury and Outland. Below these boxes they had a box of British magazines, which I started looking through until I realized how long we'd been there. They had a ton of work by local creators, maybe the biggest local creator section I've ever seen. One side of the shop had vintage toys, a ton of sports cars, hats, cups, soda, candy, shirts, etc. The wall books were at the front of the shop in a display case, with some good stuff, but most notable was the graded single pages from the first appearance of Thor and Wolverine. And one entire half of the building was just records and pop culture related stuff. Like I said, way more stuff than I can show you in this video. You'll have to go check it out for yourself. They host MicroCon every year, they have a newsletter, they have a ton of events that you can find on their website. It's nuts. So they earned 6 points in community involvement, 6 points in back issues, 4 points in new issues, 4 points in bargain section, 2 points in oh wow factor, and 3 points in organization. That leaves That's Entertainment in Worcester with a total score of 25 out of 30 points. That's a ridiculous score. This place is awesome, and that is why I'm wearing their shirt right now. Next, we went to Great Stories in Whitinsville. This shop has lots of room for gaming, and they have board game nights on top of the usual Magic and Pokemon nights. They also have a graphic novel book club, which I don't see very often. The new issue section took up this wall, starting with a DC recent issues section all the way on the left, then a new releases section, and then an Image recent issues section, a Marvel recent issues section, and more indie recent issues sorted by publishers. There were quite a few indie options, including a bunch from Ahoy Comics, which I had never seen before this trip. The back issues were on this custom table, and even though the pickings were somewhat slim, the prices were great. Every issue that isn't marked is $1, and they also do half off back issue Wednesdays, so I ended up getting 30 books for only 15 bucks. A lot of those were these issues of ROM that I thoroughly plundered. One of the most surprising parts of this tour was the quality you could find in dollar bins and 50-cent bins across the entire state, and this selection of New Mutants for 50 cents each that day is a great example. Above the back issues were some oversized books and magazines, pretty cool looking stuff. Not much that I recognized, which is great. This shop did have quite a few wall books lining the ceiling of most of the shop. Most of these were minor keys, but they did have the first Gambit, first Cable, first Guardians of the Galaxy, first Phoenix, first Miss Marvel, first Watchmen, and the first appearance of The Watcher, which I almost never see. None of these wall books had pricing on them because they're checked for market price when you buy them. Which, look, if you're in the kind of business where prices regularly fluctuate, I can see why you'd want to be tracking the market price to make sure you get the most profit you can. But if you watch the rubric video, you'll see that I am not a fan of this, so they did lose that point. They did have a substantial graphic novel section taking up most of this wall, with lots of deluxe editions of stories I'd never heard of. They had quite a few omnibuses too. The rest of the shop was wide open gaming space with tables for Warhammer at the back that had some impressive terrain, including these aquarium decorations that do admittedly make great terrain for miniatures. The middle of the shop was full of gaming supplies that I don't have much interest in, but that's about it for the comics. So they earned 4 points in community involvement, 3 points in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 3 points in bargain section, 0 points in oh wow factor, and 3 points in organization. That leaves Great Stories with a total score of 15 out of 30 points. Now that is an average shop. The next shop was a little different, TJ Cafe and Games in Milford. By the name, you can probably already tell that the comics are not the focus, but immediately when entering, you can see that this shop has a ton of opportunities for the community to get involved. They've got board game nights, D&D, minifigure painting workshops, Magic, Pokemon, Lorcana, Warhammer, a ridiculous amount of events. As you go down the hallway, you have a wall of board games and plushies and various toys, and then right before the room opens up, there's a cafe with everything from coffee to ice cream. The main space is huge and full of gaming tables. Just look at all this space to hang out and be nerdy with your friends. They even had a section for disc golf, which I have never ever seen at a comic shop. The comic area was in one corner of this space and started with an island of dollar bins and discount trades. I found the brand new Gateway Drugs trade for 75% off, which is an amazing deal. The dollar bins were pretty much all new books around 2016 and newer, which isn't what I usually look for, but it looked like there were some good deals. They also had a discount table with all the leftover books from Free Comic Book Day, which was the weekend before I came. The new issues of the week were on the rack facing out into the shop with a healthy number of indie books at the bottom. Not the widest selection ever, but pretty good considering how new the comic section as a whole was. They also had a whole wall of more recent issues with a few employee picks labeled. Next to the new issues was the graphic novel section, which did have quite a few books, though maybe not quite extensive. There were some books up on the wall, mostly recent variants or sketch covers. The comic section felt very very new, but the shop has been around for 33 years, and I can't stress enough how huge the space was. It just kept going and going and going. So they earned 4 points in community involvement, 3 points in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 2 points in bargain section, 1 point in wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves TJ Cafe and Games with a total score of 16 out of 30 points. Then we went to Rubber Chicken Comics in Bellingham, which is a completely different kind of comic shop. Right away when you walk in, there are 2 life-size Star Wars statues, and the IG-88 is made of cardboard, which I'm assuming means that it's very unique. Once you're through the doors into the shop, it's a tidal wave of nerdy stuff, most of which vintage and most of which pretty cheap. The main wall at the back of the shop was covered in recent issues, which were sorted by publisher, but the new issues of the week were set aside in a little room in the far back corner. The selection of new issues was pretty great, with lots of titles from Antarctic, Boom, IDW, Dynamite, Vault, Keenspot, Mad Cave, Magma, etc. And guarding the new issues room is this sick life-sized ET. Just outside the new issue section was a 50-cent bin table with ridiculously good stuff. I spent forever digging through these bins after the camera was off. I must have found half of my Micronauts collection in there. A big chunk of these bins was early 80s Marvel books in pretty good condition, which is like the mother lode for me. I had to pull myself away after a while so we could stay on schedule. I didn't go through the back issues as much as I would have liked either, but look at this selection of Daredevil issues. They had David Mazzucchelli covers for $2 each, absolutely insane. Also, under the main back issue bins, they had boxes of dollar books separated by publisher with some pretty great selection in there. They also had a box of magazines for 50 cents each, including a bunch of Tintin reader copies that I picked up for my classroom. Next to that was a row of $3 Bronze and Copper Age books, none of which bagged and boarded, which probably doesn't help them appeal to new readers, but to a guy like me who wants dirty reader copies, it's fantastic. And it's not that these were dirty, they were actually in really good condition, and you could find some fantastic deals. Below those boxes were boxes of $5 trades, $5 hardcovers, and $5 Marvel Essential volumes. I said oh wow probably a couple dozen times while I was here because I kept being so surprised by the value crammed into this space. The regularly priced graphic novels were kind of spread throughout the shop, with Marvel and Indie in one area, and newer stuff in another area, and DC in another area. One corner of the shop was crammed with toys and action figures and boxes upon boxes of magazines, including a ton of EC reprints from the 90s, and of course behind the counter there were dozens of wall books, nothing insane, but the first Lobo, the first Rocket Raccoon, these 60s Wonder Woman issues I keep pointing out, first Weapon X, and a whole lot of Tales to Astonish and Strange Adventures. One of my favorite parts of the shop was the decorated ceiling tiles like Carbonite Mickey Mouse, a penguin, Wolverine and Deadpool, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Animal from the Muppets. This is another one of those shops that has so much stuff I can barely begin to show you everything available. It's my absolute favorite kind of shop, and I wish I could have spent all day there. So they earned 4 points in community involvement, 6 points in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 4 points in bargain section, 3 points no wow factor, and 1 point in organization. That leaves Rubber Chicken Comics with a total score of 20 out of 30 points. Not the highest score considering how much I liked it, but as I've said before, my personal preferences don't always align with my idea of the objectively excellent comic shop. The next shop was the Laughing Shield in Attleboro. They asked not to be included, but I went anyway because I was there, so you gotta at least stop by, and I liked it a lot. Here's me to tell you more. Alright, we're in Attleboro, which is this gorgeous little town. I feel like we're in, like, the ideal American small town right now. The city halls and libraries we've been driving past are beautiful. We're at Laughing Shield, which is a fantastic shop, even though it's tiny, and they didn't want me to film inside, partly because of the rubric, which, you know, fair enough, but I feel like they would have scored really highly because the new issues are extensive and they have the most thorough descriptions of the series I've ever seen in a shop under every single title. Their back issues are on this wall, and all of the boxes roll out separately. They all have their own separate thing they roll out on. It's gorgeous. The prices are pretty good. I got the first appearance. No. I got first time Hercules shows up in the Avengers for $5. That's like issue 45 or something. For $5. It's great. They have... Oh, there's a cat! Get the cat! There's a kitty in that window. They have a great wall of trade paperbacks. They have pins that are super cheap. I bought a couple enamel pins for super cheap. They have a lot of community involvement, but like I said, they didn't want to be graded. Overall, it's a mid-20s at least shop. You should go for yourself. It's great. Lots of keys on the wall as well. They had a few graded issues from like 1942. Fantastic. I love it. Laughing Shield is a great shop. Sorry about all the weird zooms, I was trying to avoid a license plate. I'd love to show you more of that shop, but you'll have to check it out for yourself. Next, we were supposed to go to Wildtime Comics in Attleboro, but they were unfortunately temporarily closed. Hopefully they'll be back up and running again soon. So the last shop of day 2 was the Time Capsule, all the way down in Seekonk. This shop looked small on the outside, but felt much bigger once you got in. This whole first section is full of records, shelves of graphic novels, and rows of back issues. The new issues of the week were all the way at the back, and the selection was pretty good. Dark Horse, Keen Spot, Dynamite, Boom, even a couple publishers I hadn't heard of. The rest of the recent issues stretched all the way down the wall, absolutely ridiculous amount of space. The main floor was covered in these back issue bins, which were sorted by publisher and labeled by series for the most part. Regular Marvel back issues from the 80s were around $3 to $5 each, with a few price jumps for older or rarer issues, of course. The Uncanny X-Men issues were definitely more than most shops, with issue 223 coming in at $8, significantly more than I'm used to seeing. While we're looking at back issues, they also had something like a dozen boxes of underground and adult comics behind the counter, which we looked through a little bit, but it was just too much for my innocent little eyes to handle. Also behind the counter was a truly amazing assortment of wall books, including a good half-dozen EC books from the 50s and the first Polaris, Golden Lad, Weird Science Fantasy, Popular Comics, Boy Illustories from 1952, and of course a lot of regular keys like the McFarlane Wolverine cover, the classic Infinity Gauntlet cover, and more. And the selection of graphic novels was absolutely insane, with a ton of books greeting you when you first walk in. Just look at this assortment of literature, everything from silly little kids books to gorgeous brand new editions of staples of the medium. They also had these bookshelves parallel to the back issues, a giant section of graphic novels by the new issues, and this island of paper gold over by the back counter. These shelves were full of titles I've never seen before. It was fantastic. They also had a bunch of graphic novels under the back issues that had bigger discounts the more you bought, and a section of non-fiction graphic novels. Another section of the shop was completely lined with manga and had a bunch of cheaper toys and whatnot, like these boxes of toy cars for $1, and a ton of vintage video games. At the front of the shop was Freddy himself, and I'm sure you can see that this is another shop packed way too full of stuff for me to be able to show you everything. This shop had a lot of flavor, a whole lot to dig through, definitely another shop I'd like to spend more time at. So they earned 2 points in community involvement, 4 points in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 3 points in bargain section, 3 points in oh wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves the Time Capsule with a total score of 18 out of 30 points, which again, that's higher than average. The first shop of day 3 was Newbury Comics in Norwood, which is the largest location of the chain, so we spent plenty of time here. This place is an absolute warehouse, and of course we'll walk through all the nerdy stuff, but the comic area was a relatively small section at the back of the shop. The new issue section was pretty ridiculous, with everything nicely labeled by publisher, by what came out this week, by recommendation, even by variant cover. They had books from every publisher I've heard of and then some, and even a section of Newbury specific variant covers. They even had a distillery section. This location was, I'm pretty sure, the only Newbury to have something resembling a back issue section. They only went back a few years, but that's better than nothing. They even had some discount bundles of back issues. Totally crazy. Something that surprises me about Newbury Comics is the graphic novel selection. They definitely have a dedicated section for it, and you can find all the staples as well as a few more obscure books, but it's not what I would call extensive. I compare them to Vault of Midnight a lot, but Vault definitely prioritizes graphic novels more. And that's about it for comics, but there are millions of treasures to discover at Newbury, especially this location, like novelty t-shirts that are freakishly specific and simultaneously pretty awesome, 3D wood models of animals, these sick bookshelf puzzle scenescapes that I really like, board games, classic books, a massive section for vinyl records, posters, a section of, I don't know, video game related paraphernalia, like this little Kirby themed beepy thing, hats and slippers, arcade games that may or may not work, stickers, pins, these things, whatever they are, a giant rubber chicken, a huge section for Funko Pops, this weird frickin' thing, an endless sea of plushies, and so much more. They also had Zoltar, which was really cool to see, and he told me that I need to let go of the past. So I'm just not gonna pay those overdue speeding tickets, I guess. There was also a discount room with a ton of Funko Pops, those dumb superhero soda cans I see everywhere, and a bunch of other random stuff. Out of all the Newbury locations we went to on this trip, this was probably the best one. Much better than those tiny ones in the malls. So we're gonna score Newbury at at least this location. They earned 3 points in community involvement, 2 points in back issues, 3 points in new issues, 1 point in bargain section, 2 points in oh wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves the Norwood location of Newbury Comics with a total score of 15 out of 30 points, which honestly is more than I expected them to score on a rubric that is pretty specifically built for a different breed of comic shop. I'm not gonna bother scoring any of the other Newbury locations because the inventory is like exactly the same. So great job, Norwood, for having the best Newbury location. Next up is Black Hole Comics in Norwood, which used to be a New England Comics. Now this is the kind of comic shop I'm used to, with a big emphasis on back issues. The new issue section though looked incredible, with giant signs for each publisher and a massive section of just image books. This was a serious indie book section, not at all what I expected from a comic shop just down the street from Newbury. The new issues of the week were on the back wall with a huge sign and a few descriptions of the series. There was also a section for new books from the previous week and a whiteboard with picks of the week. I mean, come on guys, this is how it's done. The back issues were on this island in the middle of the shop with Marvel issues on one side and DC on the other. These were packed pretty tight, but the prices were great. A lot of these Hulk issues were priced at $2, $3, or $4 each when they could have easily been priced at $5 or $6. These Uncanny X-Men issues, right around the main era that I've collected, were pretty cheap. Only $3 or $4 for issues of X-Men under $200? That's nuts. And then just look at the prices on these Morlock Massacre issues. $5 for 210, $3.50 for 211, $3.50 for 212, and $3.50 for 222. And if you're curious about 223, it's $2.50. Look, don't bother trying to go get these issues because now that I've reviewed the footage, I'm calling them and asking to have these books mailed to me. Ridiculously cheap. Moving on, there was a large island of dollar books, a great deal of which were Bronze Age Marvel and DC, which I absolutely looted. I probably bought 50 or 60 books from those bins, mostly Defenders, but also some Master of Kung Fu, Doctor Strange, all kinds of great stuff. If you're willing to buy reader copies that are a little damaged, these are some of the best dollar bins you'll find. There were also some boxes of discount trades, most of which were half off, but some of which were 80% off. I got my copy of Black out of that box. Next to that was discount manga and a bunch of discount comic sets. All 9 issues of Secret Wars 2 for $10 is pretty great. Under the discount boxes, you had mystery boxes of 50 books for $25. Ringing the entire room was a few rows of minor keys, major keys, cool covers, all clearly labeled with price and reason for value. Behind the counter were some of the bigger keys, like a lot of early Claremont X-Men issues, the 3rd issue of Cerebus, issue 5 of Mad Comics, and the Death of Gwen Stacy. There were also some boxes by the counter full of more valuable books, a lot of which was late Silver and early Bronze Age. Also, in the spirit of the new movies, there were sections of seminal Fantastic Four books and seminal Superman books. There was a kids section by the front, a rack of Mad magazines for $2.50 each, and these awesome graphic novels about early American history. The graphic novel section wasn't the largest I've ever seen, but it was substantial, and they had a pretty good price breakdown if you bought multiple volumes. I loved this shop. It was impressive to see how much work had been put into a previous New England comic shop in just the 5 months since the owner bought it. So they earned 4 points in community involvement, 5 points in back issues, 3 points in new issues, 3 points in bargain section, 1 point in no wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Black Hole Comics with a total score of 20 out of 30 points. Another fantastic shop. The next shop was Bedrock Comics in Framingham. This shop was kind of in the process of changing hands, so the new issue section was only Marvel and kids stuff at the moment. On the same wall, a whole lot of graphic novels were displayed for easy browsing. All the way at the end was a section of trades for $6, and this was one of those odds and ends sections that I like to dig through. There were a ton of action figures and magazines in the far back corner, and right next to that was a dollar bin section. These dollar bins were a good example of dollar bins throughout the state. The books were well loved and often had some water damage. That makes sense because it's a state full of educated nerds who read a lot, and it's also raining 98% of the time. Near the dollar bins was a section of discount trades, $10 each. You could definitely find some value in there. A huge amount of space in this corner was dedicated to comic sets, all on display. In the same area was the back issue section, which wasn't huge, but you could find some good deals. They had a lot of What If Volume 1 issues for $6 each, which is pretty good. The X-Men issues were $4 for anything from the 80s, and $3 for most of the stuff after. Not the most extensive, but definitely some good deals. There was one bookshelf with some paperbacks, I'm sure for pretty cheap, including a few cartoon pocketbooks. I made the mistake of digging through the dollar bins at the front of the shop, which were just packed with books that I had to take home with me. Behind the counter, there were quite a few wall books. I didn't notice any major keys and only a few minor keys. Nothing mind-blowing, just eye-catching. They did have cups, though. You want some cups? They got some cups. This shop felt really similar to Columbus Comics in Georgia. Not super fancy, not begging for attention, just doing its job and being a place where you can buy your comics. So they earned 2 points in community involvement, 3 points in back issues, 1 point in new issues, 4 points in bargain section, no points for oh wow factor, and 4 points for organization. That leaves Bedrock Comics with a total score of 14 out of 30 points. Who knows, by the time this video is posted, it might be under new ownership. Next, we went to Newbury Comics in the Natick Mall, which was actually a bit larger than most of the mall locations we went to. We kind of sped through this one, but you can see that they had a ton of new issues, they had a bunch of graphic novels, they even had some comic sets for discounted prices, and all the usual assorted nerdy stuff like books, masks, plushies, t-shirts, socks, stickers, board games, Funko Pops, you know what I'm talking about. I did actually end up buying a couple t-shirts at that location. But we won't bother scoring them, so let's move on to the Book and Board in Winchester. I had to film this one myself, so if you're wondering why the footage is so smooth and focused, that is why. This is another shop that I had already been to, and though it is small, it's got a lot of personality. The recent issues section was not tiny, but not exactly extensive. New issues of the week were separated, but didn't have a lot of signage. Behind the counter were a few keys like First Deadpool, First Cable, First Swamp Thing, First Thunderbolts, and First Miles Morales. Not a ton of wall books, but definitely some heavy hitters. The graphic novel section was relatively small with a decent number of Marvel essentials. They had a dollar bin section with a good number of books, mostly stuff from the last 7 years, which is how long they've been open. There was also a box of discount trades, $5 for paperbacks and $10 for hardcovers, with some decent books to choose from. This shop had a lot of new board games, including Sheriff of Nottingham, which is one of my favorites. I loved their giant TARDIS on the wall, and I also liked their original art up by the counter. There wasn't a ton of stuff in there, but the shop makes up for it with downright pleasantness and a very strong community focus. They do artist signings, game nights, and a Where's Waldo event that encourages children's literacy, which I always like to see from comic shops. I also forgot to get footage of it, but they make custom buttons out of old comics, and I bought a few the first time I went. So they earned 6 points in community involvement, 3 points in back issues, 1 point in new issues, 3 points in bargain section, 1 point in oh wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves the Book and Board with a total score of 18 out of 30 points. They may be small, but they are really friendly. The next shop was Omar's World of Comics and Bistro in Lexington. First of all, can I just point out how filthy rich Lexington is? I was flabbergasted. On a more positive, but also probably related note, Omar's Comics is quite possibly the closest thing to my idea of the perfect comic shop that I've ever seen. I really should have gotten a picture with Omar himself, but I was back in shy mode because I still didn't have my camera guy with me. Let's start off with the basics. The new issues were in one corner, everything completely alphabetical with pretty decent selection. They had all the major indie books, but nothing super obscure. They did have a local creator section right next to the new stuff, which is the first time we've seen that for a minute. Under the new issues was a row of dollar bins, not a huge selection, but you could find some pretty good stuff in there. Like issue 2 of Ultimate Spider-Man, that's wild. And next to the dollar bins, they have 9 short boxes of back issues, which was an interesting assortment. A lot of it was newer stuff, and you can see that some of these issues of Thor are marked up, some are marked down, some are cover price. The early issues of X Factor were $3 each most of the time, which is pretty good, but there was only one issue of Uncanny X-Men. They also had a small 75% off graphic novel section, which was on the same table as their book club books. I love seeing comic shops hosting graphic novel clubs, and their picks were excellent. The internet is great and all, I guess, but I would much prefer to read a good graphic novel at the same pace as my friends and get together to have snacks and talk about it. The main graphic novel section of the shop was pretty substantial, with plenty of brand new volumes, omnibuses, and Marvel Epic volumes. There was a good selection of indie graphic novels too. This shop also had manga, a lot of board games, a huge kids section, and this adorable cafe section with a fountain machine that only had Maine Root brand soda, which is like one of the worst brands in my opinion. But an employee convinced me to try the cola mixed with the blueberry soda, and that was actually really good. Check out all this kids art on the wall. Here's the menu for the bistro. Feel free to pause if you're curious. I was really excited about all these toy cars for $2 each, and I probably would have bought a few if I hadn't been spending so much money already. If you went up the staircase, which was nicely decorated, you'd find yourself in Pixel Paradise, which looks freaking awesome, and also had a ton of space for gaming, as you can see by all these gamers. And by the front door, there are newspaper clippings and photographs of Omar with, yup, President Biden and Vice President Harris. I loved how much community presence Omar's had. It easily had the most opportunities to plug in of all the shops I've been to. So they earned a full 7 points in community involvement, 4 points in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 4 points in bargain section, 2 points in oh wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Omar's World of Comics and Bistro with a total score of 23 out of 30 points, which you'll notice is not the highest score I've awarded, but all they really need at this point to get up there is more back issues, some high profile stuff, and a bunch of random cool stuff. stuff. They've got the space, they've got the programs, and they've got the heart to make this a truly excellent comic shop. It's great. You should go. After that, I got my camera guy back and we drove all the way up north to Command D in Dracut. Dracut? Right away, this shop was earning points from the massive murals on the outside walls. That Dodson art recreation is amazing, and that Commandi cover art is just ridiculous. Once we got inside, we were met with the exact opposite of Omar's shop. It felt like we were in a fallout shelter owned by a 19-year-old single man from 1983. The new issues section wrapped all the way around the shop with new issues of the week clearly labeled, everything alphabetized. It wasn't the most extensive selection I've ever seen, but it was more than I expected for a shop this far out. They also had a comic bubble standee, which wasn't the latest issues, but it was a bunch of employee recommendations following a theme, which is pretty cool to see. The back issue section also wrapped all the way around underneath the new issues, and pretty much everything that was available to flip through was pretty recent. But this is only a quarter to a third of the overall back issue inventory, with most of it being stored in what they call the vault. Books in the vault are for sale, but you have to request it and then they go check for it. And I can see that not being an issue for regular customers, but you know that I'm all about accessibility in this hobby, so that will lose them a point. But while we're talking about back issues, take a look at this bundle of X Factor 1 through 97 for $300. I don't recall how much the first appearance of Cable is worth, but I'm sure I didn't spend that much putting together my run. Their back issue section included an impressive amount of manga issues, like all this Speed Racer. I did ask specifically about issue 223 of X-Men, and he said that they go by Comic Realm's pricing scale, so that issue could be only $1 if it's rated at a 3 or lower, or it could be $12 if it was Gem Mint, so most likely it would be $7 or $8. Didn't love that, honestly. There was a section of discounted books that were apparently $1 each, even though the signs all said $2. I think they were having a sale at that moment. These were sorted alphabetically and mostly bagged and boarded. In the display case, they had a few keys like Spider-Man 300, Secret Wars 8, She-Hulk issue 1, and the first appearance of Nebula. Behind the counter were some more minor keys. I think I saw the first appearance of Lobo, and a cool Blue Beetle book. I loved that this shop had action figures hanging from the ceiling pretty much everywhere. It's a great way to display a ton of merchandise while creating the illusion that you're in a nerdy tiki bar. The graphic novel section was pretty small, but it had a cute little stool that you could sit in while you browse. Everything was in a bag and clearly priced, and there were a couple of gems you could find in there. I also loved that all the support beams were wrapped in comic pages and art, and everywhere you turned you'd find some new oddity or novelty. One whole section of the shop was just games and toys, mostly vintage stuff, and it's the first time I've seen action figures organized like back issues. There were mystery items, cheap toy cars, old video games, bookmarks and earrings, pretty much any nerdy thing you could think of. If you're willing to dig or just browse around for a while, you're sure to find something you like. So they earned 2 points in community involvement, 3 points in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 2 points in bargain section, 2 points no wow factor, and 1 point in organization. That leaves Command D with a total score of 12 out of 30 points. This shop felt like a super cool garage sale, which is the type of shop that I like a lot, but at the end of the day, having a bunch of cool stuff in a room does not make you an excellent comic shop. Up next is the Comic Book Palace, way up in Haverhill, run by none other than the internet celebrity himself, Glenn O'Leary. You may remember the video that went viral where he talked about writers inserting themselves into stories, which led to him being interviewed by the Antichrist of Comics, Mark Miller. So I was stoked to visit his shop, which is definitely an old school comic shop. The new issue selection is pretty impressive, especially considering how far north we were, and it stretched around a good deal of the shop, completely alphabetized. New issues of the week were set aside all the way at the back with a whole lot of indie books, and Glenn was excited to talk about his pick of the week, Look Out. I don't often meet shop owners who are still so excited about that many new books. It was really refreshing. He also had a couple local books mixed in with all the indie stuff. The back issue section was an island in the middle of the shop, and you can see that these Hulk issues are priced pretty well. Mostly $3 each, with some at $2 or $4 or $5. Very reasonable. He didn't have issue 223 of Uncanny X-Men, but judging by the price of the issues around it, I'm guessing it would have been $2 or $3, exactly where it should be. Under the back issues was a bunch of boxes of comic sets wrapped nicely and priced reasonably. There were also some 50-cent bins, which are way more common in Massachusetts than Georgia and Michigan, and these actually had some good stuff. You could easily fill a box with issues out of here, and I was excited to finally get my own copy of Firestar issue 2, which is always way more expensive than it should be. Up by the counter, there were long boxes with near-complete runs of John Constantine and Gru for pretty good prices. One wall had the graphic novel section, which certainly wasn't the most extensive I've ever seen, but it had all the staples. walls. A good amount of wall space was taken up by wall books, with a few keys here and there, and Avengers issue 4 casually hiding behind some stuff. Most of the wall books were just striking covers, probably to get people interested, which is a strategy that I like to see. This shop also had a ton of sports and gaming cards, which you know I don't care as much about, as well as drawings by local kids or local creators, or even professionals who sent their sketches in, and a clock that was custom made for the shop. Unfortunately, we had to zoom out of there quicker than I wanted to because we were running out of time in the day. So they earned 3 points in community involvement, 4 points in back issues, 4 points in new issues, 3 points in bargain section, 2 points in oh wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves the Comic Book Palace with a total score of 20 out of 30 points, which on this new rubric is a pretty good score. Next, we sprinted over to the last shop of the day, Legends Comics and Games in Littleton. This shop was definitely a game shop that also had comics. The new issue section was clearly marked, but pretty empty, especially considering this was only Thursday. There was also a kids section beneath the new issues. New issues of the last 10 months were over on the other side of the shop, and that was mostly mainstream stuff, Marvel and DC with all the big Image books, with maybe an IDW or Dark Horse issue here and there. The back issue section was pretty sparse, with mostly new stuff and no prices that I could see. There were a couple standees with graphic novels, also pretty sparse. Clearly this shop prioritized gaming because there was a handful of gaming rooms, one of which was full of people, and this empty one looked like it would be great for D&D. They also had the longest running Magic Night in Massachusetts until COVID, which is cool. They're clearly not going to score high on my rubric, but I'm sure you can tell that selling comics is not the main goal here. So they earned 4 points in community involvement, 1 point in back issues, 1 point in new issues, 1 point in bargain section, 0 points in oh wow factor, and 3 points in organization. That leaves Legends Comics and Games with a total score of 10 out of 30 points. And they are what they are. The first shop of day 4 was Zombie Hideout in Springfield. This is one of the only shops I've ever seen with signs about shoplifting on the front door. When you walk in, there's a hallway full of toys, antiques, wrestling posters, and life-sized clown. I loved this Bluto doll. This is also the only comic shop I've ever seen with an aquarium. They had a 180-gallon saltwater tank, complete with a pretty good sump, a young sailfin tang, and a stingray. Very brave to have that much saltwater in a room full of paper books. The room was absolutely huge though, much bigger than I expected it to be. The first comics we found were some comic sets and slabbed issues, most of which were books that I already had in my collection. There were some wall books behind one of the counters, nothing all that crazy, but the Hulk vinyl was pretty cool. There was a relatively small section for new issues of the week, a few indie titles there, but not ridiculous, and the majority of the new issues were around the corner. They had a sign to let you know about the subscription discount, which is good. Next to the new issues were some boxes of recent issues 2019 to current, all of which were cover price or higher, and none of which were bagged and boarded or really even sorted. I didn't look through there for very long. Zombie Hideout has a ton of celebrity meet and greets, so they have this giant backdrop that's signed by everybody who comes out. There were more wall books along the back wall. Again, nothing crazy, mostly just cool covers. They also had display cases with notable issues throughout the shop, but a lot of their more expensive books were things that I had found in dollar bins. Which, of course, if you dig around in dollar bins for 2 decades, you're gonna find some great deals and steals, and dollar bins from 20 years ago don't look like the dollar bins of today, but it just feels weird to see these books marked up so high. The main back issue section was in the middle of the shop, and the pricing was pretty good, definitely some cheaper books mixed in. Here's the section of Alpha Flight leading into Amazing Spider-Man, which had a grand total of 1 issue. All these bagged and boarded issues were $3 each. I thought I had found the Fantastic Four section, but it was just a bunch of unsorted books. The bins on the ground were mostly 50-cent books, but it was pretty much entirely 90s filler books, not what I'm looking for. There was a graphic novel section right next to the back issues that was looking a bit out of sorts. The other side looked a lot better, and there were some books that I'd never heard of, but I wouldn't call the section extensive. The assortment of random stuff in this semi-warehouse space was certainly impressive, though it didn't feel like the kind of shop you come to for browsing and digging, more like a sort of holding space for the inventory of an online business. I'm assuming the majority of their business comes from meet and greets with wrestlers and actors, and they get some pretty impressive names to show up there. Unfortunately, the comic section seemed like kind of an afterthought, and I didn't find anything that really excited me, other than the aquarium, of course. So they earned 5 points in community involvement, 1 point in back issues, 1 point in new issues, 3 points in bargain section, 2 points in oh wow factor, and 2 points in organization. That leaves Zombie Hideout with a total score of 14 out of 30 points. And look, it might feel like I was kind of trashing the shop, but I'm just narrating what I see. The last shop that I'll include in this video is Bob's Hobbies, also in Springfield. This shop was much more old school, with mostly older inventory and almost exclusively comics. The new issues of the week were up on the wall behind the counter, which is interesting. I'm assuming he keeps 1 copy up there so you know what to ask for, and so collectors can be sure they'll get a pristine copy. Issues from the previous 2 weeks were set aside and labeled where you could get to them. The back issue island took up most of the shop, and everything everything was bagged and boarded, though they were packed in pretty tight. Bob said he had quite a bit of backstock, which is the case for most shops, but the selection was relatively decent, with older issues of Avengers going for $3 each, exactly what I want to see. There was a good number of issues from this Avengers run. I love to see it. He didn't have issue 223 of X-Men at the moment, but the issues before and after it were $2, $3, or $4 each, which is pretty great. There were quite a few wall books behind the counter, nothing ridiculous, just minor keys and cool covers. The graphic novel section was a good size, considering the overall space, and there were quite a few omnibuses and newer editions. Given the quality of the copies and the variety of titles, I'm gonna go ahead and call it extensive. There were a few spinner racks with comic sets, noteworthy covers, larger print magazines, etc. Great for catching the eye of new readers. There was also a cool mural on the back wall done by a local artist, and the display cases were full of all sorts of treats like this old Evel Knievel action figure, these vintage He-Man castles, and so much more. There was a lot of quality crammed into this shop, definitely a place worth spending an afternoon. So they earned 2 points in community involvement, 5 points in back issues, 1 point in new issues, 3 points in bargain section, 0 points in no wow factor, and 2 points in organization. That leaves Bob's Hobbies with a total score of 13 out of 30 points. I bet if Bob's Hobbies and Zombie Hideout merged, you'd have a pretty sick shop. That was just over half of the shops that I visited while I was on my tour in Massachusetts, and some of the absolute coolest shops are gonna be in part 2. Thank you again to everybody who donated to the trip, everybody who paid for the commissions that funded the trip, and of course to all the shop owners who took time out of their busy schedules to chat with me in their shop and to fill out those surveys that I sent them. Pulverize that subscribe button so you know when part 2 comes out. Tell all your friends that I'm out here doing the Lord's work, and make sure you follow my Instagram or the channel so that you know when my own comic eventually comes out, which should be pretty soon. Let me know what shop was your favorite in this video. Give a shout out in the comments if you saw your local shop. Make sure you are supporting your local comic shops, and until next time, I'm Kurt Williams, and you are somebody else.